Oh yeah, got myself sitting in front of the main man, the son of the people, the communists used to call him. Now, I apologize for being late with this video, but I've been working hard on tomorrow's This Week in Stupid Christmas special. Don't forget to tune in, because I promise you it's going to be a very funny and interesting episode. So let's talk a little bit about Christianity and communism before we go into the meat of it. You see, the communists never appreciated religious people. And this is due to the part of having Karl Marx saying that religion is the opium of the masses. In other words, how can he mind control people if they're already being mind controlled? And another main reason of why the communists didn't like Christianity is due to the fact that back then, Christians were the intellectuals. They were one of the select few that could read and write. And they would formulate arguments against socialism. So they had to be dealt with. And the communists were very brutal, especially in Russia, in dealing with Christianity. They enforced statewide atheism. And before that, they tried working with the church a little bit by having the priests acting as informers and ratting people, especially after confession. But after a while, they just got rid of them altogether. They tried to deconvert some of the clergy, but it seems that especially women, according to the communists, were very difficult to deconvert, and those were more often than not sent to Siberia in order to work in the gulags. If you want to learn more about it, you should read the book called The Harvest of Sorrows. It's a very good horror book, and it's that more horrifying when you realize that it talks about real events which happened in the Soviet Union. So let's talk a little bit about how Romanians dealt with religion under communism. It's quite interesting that religion was not banned, but it wasn't promoted either. It was tolerated, and it's quite probable that even Ceausescu, the dictator of Romania, as well as his wife, were religious themselves. So the way it worked was that religion was allowed for the masses, for the common plebs. But if you wanted to gain a high-ranking position, so we're talking about becoming a lawyer, a prosecutor, a judge, a doctor, a person in the inner party member, you had to have what they like to call clean roots, so good heritage. Like they would look at your genetics to see that you don't have any bourgeoisie in your family, or you don't have any intellectuals that were problematic in your family line. And they also expected that you are an atheist. So they wouldn't want you to go visit the church. They wouldn't want you to be religious, because they would view that as problematic. Again, it wasn't banned, but they would say something like, well, we're trying to outroot mysticism and we're fighting against superstitious beliefs and superstitious nonsense, and you're not helping. So how can you be a good communist? How can you be a good comrade if you're partaking into this opium of the masses? And most other people were just simply allowed to go to church. There was no problem with it, unless like the government wanted you gone, like maybe you upset someone. It's the same like Twitter with its terms of service being applied selectively. Technically it's not illegal, but it is problematic, and technically you can get in trouble for it, while other people who do exactly the same, they don't. So that's how religious was in Romania. And most of the priests were also informers for the Communist Party. When the Securitate showed its archives, there were a lot of priests that were collaborators, and they ratted out on the people who went there to confess. Now, with that said, what happened with Christmas? Well, Christmas wasn't being openly celebrated. So people still had to go to work on Christmas. People who didn't show up for work on Christmas would have been monitored and watched. You needed to have like a really good excuse not to show up on work, especially on Christmas Day. And other than that, people would go home, they would still celebrate it, but it was something to be done in the family, something in secret, something very hush-hush. And it's very interesting that this is exactly what the Puritans did, both in the United Kingdom and in the United States, but they did it for different reasons. The Puritans believed that the gorging, the feasting on Christmas, is sinful. And the exaggeration of having big feasts and having massive family gatherings was not what the Lord has wanted. And they also banned Christmas. It was, according for them, a time for solitary contemplation. And you still had to show up to work. So it's very interesting to see how completely different religious ideologies, well, actually one fanatical religious and one fanatically atheist, using entirely different rationale and just completely different arguments, arrive to the same conclusion that Christmas should not be a day off and people should not have large gatherings and they shouldn't celebrate, but instead they should just be at home and contemplate in solitude. Now, what's even more interesting is what the communists did with Santa Claus, because Santa Claus used to exist for a long time in many cultures, but the version of Santa Claus that we're having now, with the reindeers and the sleigh and the fact that he lives on North Pole with an army of slaves that are called the elves, that's not only an American concept, but it's marketed by Coca-Cola. That's why he's got the red belly and all, is the logo of the company. So it was viewed as Western imperialist nonsense. It was viewed as Western imperialist trash. And the communists really wanted to distance themselves from anything that would humanize Westerners or what they viewed as Western culture polluting the healthy mind of communism. So they didn't allow, obviously, any representation of the Coca-Cola version of Santa Claus. But instead what they did was they would allow people a day off on New Year's. So the 31st of December would always be a day off. People would celebrate New Year. And it was very interesting that they even allowed some anti-communist jokes on television, as long as they're not too much over the top. And they are just innuendos and implying certain things. So, for instance, if I were to compare it to America, imagine if America was actually dictatorial and you weren't able to make jokes about the president. Well, the workaround would be to make jokes about the God Emperor or, Orange Man or something like that. Like, you don't directly reference the person, but you kind of imply it and people know what you're talking about. And obviously not everyone was allowed to make these jokes. It was just like the selected few people, and only on New Year's on television they could make these jokes. It was very strange. But what I'm trying to say is that New Year's was the holiday. It was the thing where people could get together and celebrate while watching television. And it was during New Year's that Santa Claus would come. And he wasn't Santa Claus, he was actually considered Old Man Winter. And Old Man Winter would come, of course, from Russia, from Siberia, so not from the North Pole. And he would bring joy to the children of the world. And I don't know if there were any representations of him, but definitely he wasn't dressed the same way as Santa Claus was dressed. So it's very interesting the way on how the communists dealt with Christmas. And I think it was the same in USSR. Like, they still had the Santa Claus, but it was called differently and it arrived on a different day. Had nothing to do with Christmas. And then it's also interesting because at this time the Americans were also complaining about the war on Christmas, because they got a lot of actual communists, like people on the USSR payroll, to join a lot of American companies, newspapers, televisions, Hollywood, and they were actively trying to make this push in order to change the name from Christmas to holidays, which is something that corporations also liked, because in America, Christmas became a capitalist tradition. It became something where companies can sell a lot of goods. So you got like a massive profits during the holiday season. And they obviously wanted the atheists and they wanted the people of other religions to celebrate it as well, so they can purchase gifts as well. Of course, the communists didn't care about that. They did it for ideological reasons, and there were a couple of thinkers during that time that called it out. And they were being mocked for being conspiracy theorists. But that's another video for another time. I hope you particularly liked this one. If you did, let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys in the comment sections. Take care.